Imagine human society as the protagonist in an epic, never-ending story. And our antagonist? Well, it's an invisible, inescapable threat known as scarcity. Every single day, all across the globe, we are surrounded by strictly limited resources, stuff like land, labor, and capital. But our collective wants and needs, they are practically infinite. So, how do we actually survive this epic clash? We build economic systems. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack the foundational architecture of human survival itself.
I mean, really think about it for a second. When resources are completely limited, how does a massive, complex society actually decide what gets made? Who hands out the raw materials? And who's paying for all the infrastructure? These aren't just fun academic brain teasers. They are literally the architecture of survival. Every civilization, from ancient tribes right up to modern superpowers, has had to confront this harsh reality. Okay, let's dive into this and unpack exactly how humanity tackles these massive make-or-break choices.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're starting with the root scarcity problem, then we'll break down the three big questions every society has to answer: what, how, and for whom to produce. After that, we'll look at four economic systems, and finally, take a peek at the future of economics.
Section 1. The scarcity problem, the universal threat to society. You know, every single economic system out there, regardless of its underlying ideology, is fundamentally just an attempt to solve the reality of limited resources. Because we simply can't have everything we want, scarcity completely forces our hand. It stabilizes society through this crazy mix of threat and trust, basically pushing us to create complex arrangements just to keep the lights on. It all boils down to three core questions a society absolutely must answer to allocate its resources. Step 1, what kinds and quantities of goods should be produced? Step 2, exactly how shall they be produced? And step 3, for whom are we producing them? These three questions literally form the bedrock of all economic activity.
Section 2. What to produce, allocating scarce resources.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it forces a seriously difficult choice. A society only has so much time, energy, and raw material, right? So do we use it to build heavy tractors and massive factories, or do we use it to make clothes and food for right now? We are constantly forced to choose between producing capital goods that build up our future or consumer goods that satisfy our immediate needs. This foundational tension is anchored in what economists call the theory of pricing. Now, in this context, the theory of pricing isn't just about slapping a price tag on a t-shirt at the mall. It's the overarching decision-making process. It is the mechanism a society uses to balance capital goods against consumer goods while staring right down the barrel of scarce resources. But how do you actually apply this theory in the real world? Well, you have to look closely at the people. Evaluating societal needs means diving incredibly deep into demographics. What's the age distribution, the sex ratios, what are the dominant occupations, and where is everyone geographically clustered? Think about it. A society of aging farmers in a rural setting demands vastly different resources than a booming metropolis packed with young tech workers. You simply can't figure out what to produce until you know exactly who you are producing it for.
Section 3. How to produce, the methods of production.
Okay, so once we know what we need, we've got to find the least cost method of production to stretch our limited inputs as far as possible. On a broad scale, this basically presents two distinct paths: labor-intensive versus capital-intensive methods. Do we rely on human sweat, skill, and sheer manpower, or do we invest super heavily upfront in machinery, robotics, and automated factories? The choice hinges entirely on which method best fits the goods we decided on and what resources the society actually has lying around in abundance. A nation rich in labor but poor in capital is naturally going to choose a very different production path than a highly industrialized tech hub.
Section 4. For whom to produce, distributing the output.
So we figured out what to make and exactly how to make it, but who actually gets to enjoy the benefits of all this hard work? Production is only truly completed when the goods actually reach the final consumers. I mean, you can manufacture 1 million cars, but if they're just sitting around in a giant parking lot, the economic cycle is completely broken. The ultimate goal here is to shrink distribution bottlenecks down to the barest minimum and fully optimize consumer satisfaction. Getting the right goods to the right people is a massive logistical and structural hurdle. And honestly, it dictates the true success of the entire system.
Section 5. 4 economic systems. Society's competing solutions.
Throughout history, humanity has essentially engineered 4 main frameworks to answer these exact 3 fundamental questions: traditional, command, market, and mixed economies. Let's juxtapose two of the most hotly debated ones. On one side, we have the command economy. This is where a centralized authority, usually the state, controls the economic structure and plans out the output. On the flip side, we have the market economy, which relies on private entities, free markets, and the everyday forces of supply and demand. They are both trying to solve scarcity, but one uses top-down planning while the other trusts bottom-up trade.
But here's the reality check. A pure market system, it's almost entirely theoretical. Mixed systems are the global norm. Most developed nations combine characteristics of both market and command economies. They're in this constant, exhausting struggle to find that perfect, delicate balance between the freedom of private markets and the regulatory control of the government. Meanwhile, traditional economies, which are the most ancient framework based on established world customs, they definitely still exist, but they typically generate very little surplus.
This constant balancing act naturally feeds into an evolutionary perspective. Karl Marx famously theorized that superior economic systems would inevitably replace inferior ones that were unable to survive their own internal contradictions. Later on, economists like Joseph Schumpeter view this evolution through the lens of innovation. And honestly, history bears this out. Systems adapt, reform, or completely collapse based on how effectively they manage the ever-present threat of scarcity. It is a continuous, brutal cycle of societal adaptation.
Section 6. The Future of Economics. Evolutionary Progress. And this brilliantly illustrates how our systems, because they are evolutionary, are never truly finished. Tracing the historical timeline, we see a super clear progression. Back in the 16th century, mercantilism and imperialism dominated. Then, by the 18th century, modern capitalism and free trade really took hold. The 20th century saw the dramatic rise and fall of strictly planned economies and the ultimate triumph of the mixed economy. So what comes next? Humanity is constantly upgrading its economic technology, and some emerging conceptual models suggest a future driven by something totally new: synthetic cognition. Which leaves us with this incredibly provocative thought. If artificial agents actually begin generating value autonomously, instead of relying on traditional human labor, how on earth does that rewrite the rules of scarcity? How will AI completely redefine what we produce, how we produce it, and for whom it's produced? The architecture of human survival is about to get a mind-blowing upgrade. And understanding these three fundamental economic problems, that is absolutely your best key to decoding whatever crazy system comes next. Thanks so much for diving into this explainer with me, and definitely keep questioning the systems